"They're not coming from behind us," the old man said. "They'll come out of the sun." Captain Ryan Cole turned from the glowing instrument panel, certain he had misheard him. Behind the cockpit door, seated quietly in 18A, Everett Hale looked no more threatening than a retired schoolteacher on his way to a reunion. He was 83, white-haired, narrow-shouldered, and dressed in a faded brown flight jacket that had seen better decades. Yet his pale blue eyes were fixed on the right-side window with an attention that felt strangely precise. Outside, 30,000 feet above Ohio, late afternoon sunlight burned across the clouds like molten brass. Inside the military transport, the steady engine hum had changed almost imperceptibly, dropping half a note as the aircraft pushed against a hard western crosswind. Ryan glanced back at the radar display. 2 bright contacts had appeared 12 miles behind them, moving fast. Too fast for civilian traffic. First Lieutenant Mason Clark leaned toward the screen. Unidentified aircraft, closing at 400 knots. Ryan's jaw tightened. Their communications had been unstable for the last 6 minutes, and the navigation system showed them drifting dangerously close to a restricted training corridor. He keyed the radio again. "Cedar Control, this is Air Force Transport 714. Request traffic identification." Only static answered, dry and sharp inside his headset. Staff Sergeant Emily Brooks stood near the cockpit entrance, one hand gripping the overhead rail as the cabin shuddered. "Captain, passengers are asking why we changed course." "Tell them it's weather," Ryan said. "Keep everyone seated." Everett continued looking through the window, calm, motionless, listening to something no one else could hear. Ryan noticed him and felt a flash of irritation. "Mr. Hale, return your attention to the cabin. This is a flight operations matter." Everett did not turn. "Bank, 3 degrees left." Mason looked at Ryan, almost smiling. "Did he just give us a heading correction?" Ryan pushed back from the controls enough to face the old man. "Sir, you are a passenger. Let the flight crew handle the airplane." Everett finally looked at him. There was no challenge in his expression. No fear, either. 3 degrees left, he repeated. "The wind is carrying you toward their boundary faster than your display is showing." Ryan checked the instruments. The inertial navigation system reported only a minor drift, well within correction limits. "Our systems know exactly where we are." Everett's gaze moved to the vibrating edge of the cockpit compass. "Your systems know where you were 8 seconds ago." Before Ryan could answer, the radar warning tone sounded once, clean and metallic. Every voice in the cockpit stopped. The 2 contacts separated. One moved right. The other climbed above the transport's altitude. Mason's smile vanished. "They're setting up an intercept." Ryan reached for the radio selector, his fingers suddenly careful. "Cedar Control, respond immediately. We have 2 unidentified military aircraft approaching." Static filled the headset again. Everett looked toward the blinding gold light pouring through the starboard windows. "You won't see them on radar for much longer." Ryan stared at him. "And how would you know that?" The old man rested one weathered hand on a small leather bag at his feet. Faint letters, nearly erased by time, were stamped into its side. "Raven 1. "Because," Everett said quietly, as the sun swallowed both radar contacts, "that is how we taught them to approach." 20 minutes earlier, Everett Hale had boarded the transport without ceremony, carrying a weathered leather bag in one hand and a small metal case in the other. He moved slowly, but not uncertainly. Every step seemed measured, as though he had spent a lifetime learning where to place his weight when the ground beneath him could not be trusted. Staff Sergeant Emily Brooks met him near the forward hatch and checked his name against the passenger list. Everett Hale, age 83, civilian guest authorized for transportation to Dayton, Ohio. No rank was listed. No unit. No explanation for why an Air Force aircraft had been assigned to carry him. Emily offered to take the leather bag, but Everett held it closer to his side. "Thank you," he said. "This stays with me." His voice was low and rough, softened by age, but still carrying the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. Captain Ryan Cole watched from the cockpit doorway. He had been expecting a retired general, a decorated test pilot, or perhaps a government official traveling under restricted orders. Instead, he saw a thin white-haired man in a faded brown jacket with worn cuffs and an old pair of polished boots. Ryan glanced at the paperwork in Emily's hand. "This is our special passenger?" he asked. Everett heard him, but showed no sign of offense. Emily lowered her voice. His authorization came directly through Wing Operations. Wing Operations sends us unusual requests every week, Ryan replied. That does not make every passenger important. Everett looked past them into the cockpit. His eyes moved across the instrument panel, the radio stack, and the wide front windows. He did not stare with curiosity. He studied the aircraft with recognition. Where would you like to sit, Mr. Hale? Emily asked. Somewhere I can see the right wing. Ryan folded his arms. Most passengers ask for comfort. Comfort does not tell you what the airplane is doing, Everett said. Mason Clark looked up from the co-pilot's seat, amused. Ryan gave a brief, polite smile that did not reach his eyes. The instruments tell us what the airplane is doing. Everett nodded once. Most of the time. Emily led him to seat 18A beside the starboard window. He placed the metal case carefully beneath the seat in front of him, then rested the leather bag across his knees. Its surface was darkened by years of rain, sunlight, and handling. Near the bottom, beneath a line of scratches, several faded letters had been pressed into the leather. Ryan noticed them while completing his cabin inspection. Raven 1. That a company name? He asked. Everett ran his thumb across the lettering. No, old squadron nickname? Something like that. Mason leaned from the cockpit doorway. Sounds dramatic. Ryan smiled. People used to choose call signs differently, I suppose. Everett turned toward the window, where the afternoon sun stretched across the runway in a sheet of pale gold. You did not. Choose the ones that mattered, he said. A moment later, the engines began to turn, and the steady vibration passed through the floor beneath his boots. Everett closed his eyes, not from fear, but recognition. Somewhere beneath the clean mechanical rhythm, he seemed to hear an older engine, an older sky, and voices that had been silent for more than 50 years. The transport climbed through 10,000 feet beneath a clear Ohio sky, its engines settling into a deep, even rhythm as the runway disappeared behind a veil of summer haze. Everett Hale remained beside the starboard window, one hand resting on the leather bag across his knees. He watched the wing flex gently in the rising air, then studied the thin streaks of cloud forming ahead. Captain Ryan Cole completed the climb checklist and handed control to First Lieutenant Mason Clark before stepping into the cabin. He paused beside seat 18A and glanced again at the faded letters pressed into the leather. Raven 1, Ryan said. You never explained that. Everett kept his eyes on the horizon. It was my call sign. Mason heard the answer through the open cockpit door. Raven 1, he called back. That sounds like the hero in an old radio show. A young communications specialist seated near the forward bulkhead laughed. Ryan smiled as well, not cruelly at first, but with the easy confidence of a man certain that the past had become harmless. Were all the good call signs already taken? He asked. Everett turned slowly. His expression carried no embarrassment. There were not many of us left when they gave it to me. The laughter weakened, but Ryan did not notice. What did you fly? Several aircraft. That is a careful answer. It is an accurate one. Mason leaned back far enough to look into the cabin. Did Raven 1 command the whole sky? A few crew members chuckled again. Everett lowered his gaze to the weathered bag and traced the old lettering with one finger. No, he said. I only tried to bring my people home. The words landed quietly, heavier than Ryan expected. Staff Sergeant Emily Brooks stopped near the cargo restraints, watching Everett with growing interest. She had heard veterans exaggerate before. They usually spoke too loudly, filling every silence with rank, dates, and medals. Everett offered none of those things. He seemed almost determined to leave the story buried. Ryan glanced toward the cockpit instruments. Times have changed, Mr. Hale. Modern crews have satellite navigation, digital weather radar, and systems that calculate what a pilot used to guess. Everett looked through the window at a narrow band of clouds forming 20 miles ahead. A machine can tell you the pressure is falling, he said. It cannot tell you why the birds have turned east. Ryan followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual. We are at 22,000 feet. There are no birds up here. Not up here, Everett replied. Below us. Mason's voice came through the intercom. Captain, the secondary navigation display just reset. Ryan turned toward the cockpit. It will recover. A soft electronic chime sounded overhead. Then another. Emily looked toward the forward panel as the cabin lights flickered once. Ryan stepped back into the cockpit and checked the displays. The aircraft was still climbing, but the position marker had shifted slightly west of the planned route. Minor synchronization error, he said. Mason adjusted the radio frequency. Cedar control, transport 714, radio check. Static answered. The dry hiss filled the cockpit, faded, then returned. Behind them, Everett raised his eyes toward the wing. The sunlight had changed. A hard golden glare spread across the glass while the clouds ahead darkened along their lower edges. He tightened his hand around the leather bag. Ryan tried the radio again. Still nothing. Mason glanced at the navigation screen. We are drifting. Ryan corrected the heading by 1 degree. Everett spoke from the cabin, his voice calm enough to carry through the open door. 1 degree will not be enough. Ryan looked back, irritation returning. Mr. Hale, we have this under control. Everett watched the wingtip cut through the bright air. Then you should turn 3 degrees left before the wind decides for you. Ryan held Everett's gaze for 1 second too long, then turned back to the instruments. Maintain. Present heading, he told Mason. The navigation system will correct itself. Mason adjusted the controls, but the position marker continued sliding west, 1 slow pixel at a time. Outside, the clean blue sky had begun to lose its color. A sheet of gray clouds spread beneath the transport, and the sunlight striking the right wing sharpened into a white glare. Everett watched the wingtip tremble. He felt the change through the seat before the cockpit instruments registered it. The aircraft entered a band of rough air, lifting sharply and settling again with a low shudder that passed through the cabin floor. Emily steadied herself against the seatback. Captain, the passengers felt that. Just turbulence, Ryan replied. He pressed the radio switch. Cedar control. This is Air Force Transport 714 on assigned route to Dayton. Request immediate radio check. The answer was another wash of static. Mason frowned at the navigation display. The satellite position is 8 miles behind the inertial estimate. Ryan reached for the reset control. Run the alignment again. At this altitude. Do it. Everett looked toward the cockpit compass. Its needle held steady, but the small vibration along its edge told a different story. The crosswind is stronger above the cloud line, he said. Ryan did not turn. Mr. Hale, remain seated. You are crossing the northern edge of a restricted corridor. Mason glanced at the map display. The system says we are still 6 miles clear. The system is late, Everett said. Ryan's shoulders tightened. He had spent years earning the authority of the left seat. Every checklist, every qualification, every evaluation had taught him to trust verified information and reject distraction. An old passenger speaking from instinct was not verified information. You are not part of this crew, he said. You do not have access to our route, our weather data, or our flight plan. Everett's voice remained level. I do not need the route to know where the wind is carrying you. Another warning tone sounded, short and metallic. Mason looked down. Unknown radar contact, 12 miles behind us. Ryan leaned toward the screen. A second contact appeared beside the first. Both were closing quickly. Emily stepped closer to the cockpit entrance. Could they be training aircraft? Not on this heading, Mason said. Ryan selected an emergency frequency. Unidentified aircraft approaching transport 714. Identify yourselves. Silence answered. The contacts split apart. One moved to the transport's right side. The other began climbing. Everett closed his eyes for half a heartbeat, listening to the spacing between the warning tones. When he opened them, the years seemed to fall away from his face. They are establishing visual control, he said. 1 high, 1 wide. Ryan looked back sharply. How do you know their pattern? Everett studied the bright western sky. Because whoever trained them believed in patience. The aircraft jolted again. The metal case beneath Everett's seat slid into the aisle and struck the floor with a hard, clean sound. Its latch opened. A faded black patch slipped out beside a weathered identification tag, and an old photograph curled at the corners. Emily bent to retrieve them. The patch showed a black raven with a thin silver line across one wing. Its edge was darkened by an ancient burn mark. She stared at the symbol, certain she had seen it somewhere before. Ryan caught the hesitation in her face. Sergeant Brooks, secure the cabin. Emily lifted the patch. Captain, wait. Before she could explain, the radar contacts vanished. Mason leaned toward the display. They are gone. Everett looked into the blinding sunlight off the right wing. No, he said quietly. They are exactly where they intended to be. Emily held the patch beneath the cockpit light. The black Raven was faded almost gray, but the thin silver line across its wing remained sharp enough to catch the eye. Along the lower edge, tiny stitched letters had nearly disappeared into the worn fabric. Daniel Mercer. Ryan glanced at it, then at the old photograph lying beside Everett's metal case. 3 young pilots stood beneath the wing of an aircraft on a rain-darkened runway. Their uniforms were creased, their faces tired, and one of them was unmistakably Everett Hale. His hair had been dark then, his shoulders straight, his expression calm. The man beside him wore the same Raven patch. "So it is real," Mason said. There was less humor in his voice now, but Ryan still heard a challenge in it. He picked up the patch and turned it over between his fingers. A unit souvenir does not explain how he knows an intercept pattern. Everett watched Ryan's thumb pass over the burned edge. "That is not a souvenir." Ryan looked toward him. "Then what is it?" "Something that belonged to a man who trusted me." The cabin shifted as the transport crossed another current of unstable air. The identification tag slid against the metal floor with a soft scrape. Everett reached down for it, but Ryan was closer. He lifted the tag and read the name stamped into its surface. "Daniel Thomas Mercer." "Friend of yours?" Ryan asked. Everett's eyes settled on the tag. "He flew my right wing." Ryan looked again at the old photograph. "And Raven 1 was your call sign?" "Yes." "You expect me to believe that this old patch still carries some kind of authority?" The question came out harder than Ryan intended. Pressure had narrowed his patience. 2 unknown aircraft were somewhere beyond the glare. His radio link was unreliable, and the navigation system continued reporting conflicting positions. Everett did not answer immediately. He looked through the window, where the sun had become a bright white wall. "Authority has nothing to do with it," he said. "Then why keep it for 50 years? Everett's face changed almost imperceptibly, not with anger, with distance. The steady engine hum stretched into another sound in his memory, rougher and lower, rolling across a dark sky heavy with rain. He was young again, seated beneath a dim instrument panel while 3 aircraft moved through cloud with barely enough visibility to hold formation. Daniel Mercer's voice came through the radio, thin beneath the static. His navigation instruments had failed. His fuel reading was falling. The command center ordered Everett to continue toward the base with the remaining aircraft. Daniel's machine could not maintain the planned speed. "Raven 1, go," Daniel had said. "I will find another way down." Everett had looked through the rain and seen a faint navigation light trembling off his right wing. "Negative," he answered. "You stay with me." He reduced speed, moved closer, and used his own lights to give Daniel a horizon. For 40 miles, they crossed the storm wingtip to wingtip. Everett spoke steadily through the radio, calling every turn, every descent, every correction. Daniel followed the sound of his voice when his instruments could no longer give him certainty. The memory faded. The cockpit returned. Ryan was still holding the patch. Everett reached for it, and this time Ryan gave it back. "Daniel told me something after we landed," Everett said. "He said that as long as Raven 1 stayed beside him, he knew there was still a way home." Emily looked at the silver line across the Raven's wing and finally understood what it represented. Not rank, not decoration, formation. Ryan's expression remained guarded, but his grip on the identification tag loosened. Outside, a dark shape moved briefly through the sunlight beyond the right wing, too fast to follow. Then the radio cracked alive with a single burst of static and a voice that sounded controlled, distant, and unmistakably military. "Transport 714, confirm the identity of the passenger carrying the Raven insignia." Ryan reached for the radio switch, but his hand stopped above it. The voice had not asked for the aircraft commander, the route, or the reason they had entered restricted airspace. It had asked about the passenger. Mason looked from the headset panel to Everett. How would they know about the patch? Emily was already moving. She carried the photograph to the small communications station behind the cockpit and opened the secure passenger database. The screen flickered as the aircraft passed through another pocket of rough air. "Mr. Hale," Ryan said, "I need your full name and former service number." Everett looked at him with the same calm expression. "You already have my name. I need verification." "Then verify it." There was no arrogance in the answer. That made it more unsettling. Ryan keyed the radio. "Unknown military station. This is Transport 714. Passenger is identified as Everett Hale." "Repeat." Everett Hale. Stand by for additional information. The channel went silent. Emily entered the name. The first search returned no active record. The second produced a civilian transportation authorization signed by Wing Operations. The third required command-level access. His file is restricted, she said. Ryan stepped closer. Restricted at what level? It does not say. She enlarged the old photograph and compared the Raven symbol with the patch. Then she searched the squadron archive. A black and white image appeared, showing 3 aircraft on a rain-covered runway. Beneath it was a short entry dated more than 50 years earlier. Raven flight. Emergency recovery during severe weather. 2 aircraft returned through limited visibility under visual formation guidance. Lead pilot name withheld. Ryan read the line twice. Withheld. Emily scrolled farther. Most of the page had been sealed, but one sentence remained visible. Raven 1 maintained formation after receiving direct clearance to separate. Everett watched the clouds beyond the window. In his memory, Daniel Mercer's navigation light still trembled in the darkness. Rain had struck the canopy so hard that the world beyond it became a shifting wall of gray. Daniel's voice had weakened over the radio. I cannot hold altitude. Everett had moved closer until the other aircraft's wingtip appeared through the storm, no more than 40 feet away. Do not chase the instruments, he had said. Watch my light. The command center warned him that the entire flight could be placed at risk. Everett heard the warning, acknowledged it, and stayed beside Daniel. He called every movement before making it. 5 degrees right. Hold the descent. Ease the power back. Stay on my wing. There had been no dramatic speech, only a steady voice, keeping fear from taking control. The third pilot, Thomas Whitaker, formed on Everett's left side and repeated each instruction when Daniel's radio began to fail. 3 aircraft became one shape moving through the storm. When the runway lights finally appeared beneath the clouds, Daniel spoke only 4 words. I knew you stayed. Everett returned to the present as the secure radio crackled again. A different voice came through, older and deeper. Transport 714. This is Brigadier General Marcus Whitaker at Raven Wing Command. Confirm that Everett Hale is aboard your aircraft. Ryan stared at the radio. Emily slowly turned toward Everett. The surname from the archive sat bright on the screen behind her. Whitaker. Everett raised his eyes, and for the first time since boarding, something warmer than memory crossed his face. Ryan pressed the transmit switch. Confirmed, General. Everett Hale is seated in the forward cabin. The reply came without hesitation. Then understand this clearly, Captain. You are not carrying an unidentified civilian. You are carrying Raven 1. The words settled over the cockpit with more force than the warning tones had carried. Ryan kept his hand on the radio switch, but for several seconds he could not speak. Mason stared at Everett as though the quiet man in seat 18A had changed shape before his eyes. Emily looked again at the restricted archive, searching for the missing pieces. General Whitaker, Ryan finally said. We entered the corridor because of a navigation disagreement and a communications failure. 2 aircraft approached us, but we have not established their identity. Their identity is not your immediate concern, the general replied. Your position is being corrected now. Maintain present altitude and do not alter course unless instructed. Ryan glanced at the display. The 2 contacts had returned, one on either side of the transport, each holding exactly 6 miles of separation. They were no longer closing. They were waiting. General Whitaker continued. Put Mr. Hale on the radio. Ryan looked toward Everett. The old man remained seated, the Raven patch resting in his open palm. Sir, the cockpit headset will not reach him. Emily removed the auxiliary headset from the communications station and carried it into the cabin. Everett accepted it carefully, turning the worn ear cup as though it belonged to another age. The radio hissed. Then the general spoke again, but the command had left his voice. Raven 1, this is Marcus Whitaker. Everett lowered his eyes. I know who you are. A breath passed across the open channel. My father was Thomas Whitaker. He flew my left wing. He told me that story every year on the night it happened, Marcus said. He said Daniel Mercer watched your lights, but he watched your decisions. He said you had permission to leave and chose to stay. Ryan looked at the photograph in Emily's hand. The third young pilot stood beside Everett, smiling beneath the aircraft wing. Your father made the same choice, Everett said. He could have continued to the base. He stayed in formation. He said that was because you never asked anyone to do what you would not do yourself. The cockpit fell completely silent. Even the engine noise seemed farther away. Ryan remembered his own laughter, his certainty that an old call sign was only decoration. Across the radio, General Whitaker spoke with deliberate care. Raven Wing still teaches that recovery. We call it the hail formation. Every pilot assigned here learns why 3 aircraft landed together when regulations allowed only one to turn back. Everett looked through the window at the bright edge of the cloud bank. You should teach them that Daniel held his aircraft steady. He did the hard part. We teach them all 3 names, Marcus replied. Ryan checked the navigation display again. Their position marker had stabilized. A new route appeared, leading them safely east toward Dayton. General, are the aircraft beside us part of Raven Wing? He asked. They are, Marcus said. They were sent to identify an aircraft entering restricted space. Their mission has changed. Outside the right window, a gray fighter emerged from the sunlight, smooth and silent at a distance, its wings level with the transport. A black raven marked its tail, crossed by a single silver line. Another fighter moved into view on the left. Emily looked from one aircraft to the other. They are taking formation positions. General Whitaker's voice returned over the radio. Raven 1, your flight is no longer alone. Raven 2 and Raven 3 will accompany you the rest of the way. The fighter on the right eased closer until its canopy became visible through the transport window. Sunlight flashed across the glass, then faded as the pilot matched speed with exact precision. On the opposite side, the second aircraft settled into position, creating a 3-plane formation that seemed to close around the transport like a promise made visible. Everett stared at the Raven emblem on the tail. The silver line across the black wing was identical to the one stitched into the patch in his hand. For a long moment, he did not move. Then the pilot on the right turned his helmet toward the cabin and raised one gloved hand in salute. The pilot on the left did the same. Emily felt the cabin grow still behind her. Passengers who had sensed the tension now leaned toward the windows, their voices fading into silence. Ryan watched through the cockpit glass, unable to look away. Only minutes earlier, he had treated Raven 1 as a relic, a story attached to worn leather and fading thread. Now 2 modern fighters held station beside his aircraft under orders from a brigadier general, not because of rank, but because of memory. The secure radio clicked. Raven 2 to Raven 1, a young voice said. Position established on your right wing. A second voice followed. Raven 3 to Raven 1. Position established on your left. Everett lifted the auxiliary headset closer. His hand trembled once, then became steady. You are holding too tight, he said. The 2 fighter pilots adjusted almost instantly, opening the distance by several feet. Mason looked at Ryan. They listened to him. General Whitaker answered before Ryan could speak. They were trained to. Everett studied the formation. Better, he said. Keep the sunlight behind you on the turn east. Understood, Raven 1, the right side pilot replied. The title carried no amusement now. It carried discipline. Ryan looked down at the photograph Emily had placed near the throttle quadrant. The 3 young men beneath the old aircraft wing had stood in nearly the same positions. Daniel Mercer on Everett's right. Thomas Whitaker on his left. Everett in the center. The past had returned, not as a story, but as a formation at 30,000 feet. Ryan pressed the radio switch. General Whitaker, route. Correction is complete. We are clear of the restricted corridor. Confirmed, Marcus replied. Maintain the new heading. Raven flight will escort you to Dayton. Ryan hesitated. General, was this arranged in advance? No, Captain. They were sent because your aircraft crossed into controlled airspace without reliable communication. They remained because Raven 1 was aboard. Ryan absorbed the distinction. The fighters had arrived as a warning. They stayed as an honor. Everett looked through the right window again. The young pilot lowered his salute but kept his head turned toward him. Raven 1, he said over the radio, my grandfather flew maintenance support for your squadron. He used to say your voice could make a bad night feel shorter. Everett's expression softened. Your grandfather kept our aircraft in the sky. We only borrowed them. The pilot was quiet for a second. He would have liked to hear that. Ryan removed his headset and stepped into the cabin. He stopped beside Everett's seat, stripped of the authority that had made him careless. Mr. Hale, he said, I was wrong. Everett looked up at him. Ryan glanced toward the 2 fighters, then back to the Raven patch. I thought the name was something you carried from the past. Everett closed his fingers around the patch. No, he said quietly. It was something the others carried home. The transport descended through 12,000 feet as Dayton appeared beneath a wide field of late afternoon light. Roads curved between green neighborhoods. Hangars lined the edge of the airfield, and the runway stretched ahead like a dark ribbon laid across the earth. Raven 2 and Raven 3 remained beside the aircraft, steady and precise, their gray wings catching flashes of gold as they moved through the thinning clouds. No one in the cabin spoke above a whisper. Everett Hale sat by the window with Daniel Mercer's identification tag in one hand and the faded Raven patch in the other. The two objects looked small against his weathered palms, yet every person nearby seemed to understand that they carried more weight than any metal displayed behind glass. Captain Ryan Cole returned to the cockpit and guided the transport onto final approach. His voice over the intercom had changed. The confidence remained, but the sharpness was gone. He spoke with care now, as though every instruction deserved respect. At 1,000 feet, the fighters rose slightly, then peeled away in opposite directions before circling back over the field. Everett watched them go without smiling. He simply nodded once, the same quiet acknowledgement he might have given wingmen returning to formation after a long night. The transport touched down smoothly. Tires met the runway with a low rush. Engines reversed, and the aircraft slowed beneath a clear American sky. As they taxied toward the military ramp, Emily Brooks looked through the forward window and saw only 3 people waiting near the painted line. 2 young fighter pilots stood in flight suits beside their helmets. Between them was Brigadier General Marcus Whitaker, tall, silver-haired, and holding the same black and white photograph Emily had found in the archive. No band played. No crowd gathered. The honor was too personal for spectacle. When the cabin door opened, warm air moved inside, carrying the scent of pavement, fuel, and cut grass. Everett rose slowly. Ryan stepped forward to help, then stopped before touching him. Everett noticed and gave a slight nod. Together they walked down the steps. General Whitaker came to attention before Everett reached the ground. The 2 fighter pilots followed. Marcus raised his hand in a salute that he held longer than regulation required. Everett looked at him, then returned it. For a moment, age disappeared from both men. One stood for a father who had come home. The other stood for the men he had refused to leave behind. Marcus lowered his hand and held out the photograph. My father kept a copy beside his desk until the day he died, he said. Everett studied the younger face of Thomas Whitaker. He was a good wingman. He said you were the reason he understood what leadership meant. Everett looked toward Ryan, who had stopped several feet away. Leadership is not what people call you, Everett said. It is who still trusts your voice when the instruments stop helping. Ryan stepped closer. Mr. Hale, I owe you an apology. Everett waited. I heard an old call sign and assumed it belonged to a story that no longer mattered, Ryan continued. I was wrong about the story, and I was wrong about you. Everett placed Daniel Mercer's identification tag in Marcus's open hand. Then do not waste the lesson. Marcus looked down at the name. Daniel was my uncle, he said quietly. My family knew he flew with my father, but we never knew why this was kept. Everett closed the general's fingers around the tag. He asked me to make sure someone remembered. He stayed steady. Beyond them, Raven 2 and Raven 3 rolled slowly along the taxiway, their black emblems visible in the fading sun. Ryan watched Everett follow them with his eyes. Does a call sign ever retire? He asked. Everett slipped the old patch into his leather bag. Some do, he said. The ones built from promises do not.